Hello, everyone, and this is Conversations from the Alcove, a series that looks at playwriting, art, life, and the world from the Lucille Lortel Theater. Hi, my name is Caridad Svich. I am the artistic director of the Alcove New Play Development Program at the Lortel. I'm also a playwright, and I do many other things in the arts. I am beaming in at this moment from the land of the Lenape, and I'll give you a brief audio description. So I'm against a white background. I'm wearing a blue and white top, striped. My hair is auburn. It's combed to one side, so there's kind of like a little mane that's on my side here. I have bangs, glasses that are tortoiseshell, but they sort of have a cat eye kind of quality about them. I'm fair skinned, I have brown eyes, and I'm wearing red lipstick in honor of our red background that we have today here on this surface, digital space, and all those things. I think I've described most things. If I've forgotten something, I will let you know. To my other side of the screen is the wonderful Jesus Valles, educator, storyteller, poet, performer from Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. Currently at Brown University. Oh, just graduated
Just
from
graduated.
Brown. Just graduated from Brown University, in that interesting space of being out of an MFA. Is the recipient of many awards, most recently the one from Yale, the Drama Prize for their play Bathhouse PowerPoint. The work has been seen at Teatro Vivo, the Vortex, the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, New York Theater Workshop, the Flea Theater, and is just a person that works also in solo performance as well as being a playwright, writing maybe for multiple voices or solo voices. Welcome, Jesus.
Thank you so much for hosting this and for also the conversations that have led up to this too. I've just been very nourished by this process. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for being part of it all. I should full disclosure for people watching somewhere in the universe. Jesus is one of our playwrights. It's been micro commissioned by the Lortel. We have a series of micro commissions that we've did a first round of this year. This is 2023. A second round of micro commissions will be announced in the fall of this year. So trying to support writers to make things. Cool. I'm starting each episode of this series with the same question. I'm fascinated already by the many different ways that writers have responded to this. And the question is, we're in the climate era. That's like unavoidable. So how has living during potential climate collapse and extinction affected your practice?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this question. And I love the invitation of extinction as like part of the sort of invocation of the specific time we're in. Because I think yeah, in terms of how it's affected our writing practice, I think one, I have over the last few months really have been thinking a lot about the possibility of the reading series and the sort of like larger tradition of like lectures and like oral tradition and like sort of like storytelling circles and how those particular models of making performance happen seem to really speak to like I think our particular, and then when I say our, I mean like those of us who are constantly sort of like watching the world hurt when it comes to climate crisis in specific ways. Yeah, I think there's something about the idea that theater can still be summoned through breath and body and the act of some semblance of communal gathering, whether it be digital or not. And that the theatrical gesture can sometimes be tremendously powerful if it is powered largely by the imagination of the audience. So like this is speaking directly to like, again, how we think about sets, how we think about power and energy and lights, how we think about all of the resources, material at that then become or have the possibility of becoming waste after performance. But I think similarly, yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking a lot about, to sort of think back to extinction, right? Like I'm thinking so much too about how theater survives and how we can think about models for surviving and for theater to remain a viable practice and a practice that we see value in, beyond like production as the thing that marks the theater has happened. So I think I've become really invested in like readings. I've become really, really invested in how we can get at small gestures to create big pictures inside of readings as a way to sort of satiate the hunger for production and say like, no, the moment has already happened. It's happened here. It's happened between us because we watched it happen. We made it happen. A few weeks back, I was working with Adil Mansour, and we were talking about desires in the reading of this play that we were working on, and I love language, obviously, and yes, I feel deeply about language, and also sometimes I'm curious about the fact that like when we say we make theater, we're actually like we're making experience. And so I said to Adil, I was like, I care about language, yes. And also I think for this process, I feel a little more invested in effect. Like what is the effect of how we're sort of coming at a particular scene, and how do we use language as an element of it, not as the thing being like entirely prioritized. So yeah, thinking about models of theater that might yield less waste. Also thinking about like how to reset and rethink our desires for plays, and for art, in a way that also like that in a way that might yield less waste too, but and that also hopefully might oh God, I don't know, whatever, I'm gonna say it, in a way that might maybe like starve the more sort of like, um, yeah, the more sort of like capitalist driven models of production. I don't know, and that's always kind of a fraught project in the United States, given what this country is. But it has, I think the last few years and the last few months specifically have made me think a lot about the question of like how do my wants and my desires for my art in some way contribute to like damage to the planet. And that's not to sort of like mea culpa myself into self-flagellation, because we also know that the larger factors are like the military industrial complex and corporations. But I'm trying to be mindful and observant about my desires for playwriting and its possibilities, is what I'll say.
Yeah, no, that's like amazing. I guess my question inside of that is also to do with the form that the work takes. So not just the materials that are used or the engagement with the audience, but is it making you rethink how to make the play from the ground up?
Yeah. I hmm I love the question now. I love the way the question's being worded too, because I'm like, oh, like I'm thinking a lot about what it means to make the play and write the play now, like because of how you've asked it. Because I think when I think how I write the play is almost always born out of like an intense, just like, this is just a thing I want to write. No one is ever going to do it. We're never going to say it out loud. I just want to write this thing. That's like the first sort of like order of operations, the first like level of the thing coming into being. I think this question of like the making of the play does then become a thing that I think a lot about, particularly in editing. Like I think once I go back and I start really looking at the thing, I become really curious about um yeah, how does a piece, for example, right, this is a sort of small example, but how does a piece of stage direction yield itself to multiple possibilities, right? Like, it doesn't have to be that, like, you know, the play calls for a river, so there is this huge like body of water on stage. How might a moment, I saw this beautiful staging of Lex Derman's Playhouse, and a character gets thrown into a river, but the way it was shown was we saw the actor who gets thrown into the river hold up a glass of water, take a sort of like figurine of themselves, and then drop it into the glass of water. And the effect was so full because we heard like the sound cue of a body splashing in water, and the gesture of like that glass and that figure done by the actor themselves was so elegant that I was like, oh, this is lovely. How to think, I think a question that drives the making for me as I go back and look at edits and think about stage direction specifically, I think often like, what is the coolest, cheapest way we can do this? And that feels really wonderful. I've had the really good fortune too of collaborating with people like Elizabeth Barrett, who's a fantastic projection designer. And I find her work specifically to be so so full in that she can look at a piece of text and a piece of stage direction and make you feel so accompanied by the projection. And when the show is done, you know, you turn off the projector and like, okay, cool, great. So there's something really lovely, I think, about thinking with design in the process of editing, while also allowing for like room for invention to happen inside it.
Yeah. When I worked with Fornez many years ago, she would often say, and of course this is also part of her practice, but you should be able to make it with $50. You know what I mean? Like, go to the thrift shop or go outside, find things, like figure out and of course $50 back then was like the equivalent maybe of, I don't know, $75 now. Right? You know what I mean? It wasn't a lot, but I do remember being daunted because I think when I worked with her, I just come out of an MFA program at UC San Diego, wonderful program, where we had resources. You know, there was this magical resources that seemed to fall from the sky. You know, and so I think I got used to that. Like, if I asked for something, it would materialize somehow. And so that was like a real lesson in, oh, wait, the playwright can also be thinking about I mean, you could walk into a production experience, let's say, and you have all the resources in the world. Or you can be walking into one where there's very little fiscal resources. And so you still have to figure out a way to make it happen. And so that was like an incredible lesson, because I think before that, I'd sort of been seduced by the idea that whatever grandiose notions I might have would just automatically, you know, occur. And hadn't really been thinking about like the material cost of something, but also that even if it's not implemented, that I needed to have in my back pocket as an architect of the experience, a version that was as low maintenance as possible, while still dreaming big, right? So it's been an interesting thing to sort of navigate this time of extinction, thinking about those questions, because on the flip side of this, and I know there's been some discussion, I mean, there always is, but some discussion more recently around the audience, what does the audience want? And oh my heavens. And sometimes the audience has been trained, at least in the US, to want to see the money on stage. Do you know what I mean? Like, I sat in my seat because it's a consumerist model here. So I sat in my seat. Where's my money? It's got to be on stage. I've got to see it. I've got to be dazzled by it. You know, like all those things. and sometimes there's a distrust of something where you don't see the money on stage. You know what I mean? Like, what do you
Yeah.
mean there's no set, no set, no set? You know what I mean? And because that's the first thing people go to because it's a visual, right? So, I mean, there's lights and there's sound and there's all these other things. Um, uh, and you'll often hear even people that are in theater grumbling, you know, like they could have done like so many things, and why did they choose to do it? But you know, it's like, well, A, it's a choice, and B, you don't have to have all the things, right? So, but I just think about this notion of value and how it's part of the work that we do, but our own value of the work, but also how other people value it, and how audiences are being taught to value things. And I guess that brings me to the notion of, forgive me for making this such an incredibly long question. So value also makes me think about that a lot of your work is staging, um, and telling and sharing stories and memories of people whose bodies have been part of the extractive system of capitalism, the ones that are considered surplus, disposable, easily um, burned through in a way, like, you know what I mean? Used up and thrown out, that horrible, horrible, corrupt way that capitalism does. And so, how you negotiate the staging of extractive bodies and the telling of their stories within a system that is, at least in the US, for the most part, and I'm not saying all theaters do this, but I would say complicit in this notion of ascribing value to, and wanting to see the your money's worth in quotation marks on stage.
Woo,
Sorry, that's such a big question.
it's a big question. I
It's like a
love
dissertation. I'm so sorry.
I love big questions. Mi mono mole. And I never have good answers for big questions. Because I also feel like once we get at the answer, we're probably trapped. So I usually just have like, here are my inklings, and then here's some extra questions I have. Yeah. But I love this question. And I actually do feel like it's so attached to, I think, yeah, I mean, you know, this question of writing in the age of extinction and climate crisis is also the question of like, how do we think about extraction, right? Like just period, like, that is the question. Like all of these things are deeply tied. And I think that actually is for me, the one, I will say like that intimacy, that like to the bone closeness with this particular system, as the child of someone who has been cleaning homes in the US since she was 13, my father who has been building American homes and yards and landscaping since he was like 12, and what that did to their bodies, watching their bodies be warped by this particular labor system and its demands and its lack of protections, and its insistence on their disposability, I think is the thing that launched me into thinking about like language as a way to make sense of how this could happen, but also performance as a way to like express my frustration and my anger at this particular system. And I do say express as in like it does feel like it's me sort of like crunching everything up and trying to wring it out of myself, so that I can like have room to feel other things. But yeah, I think for me that particular that question of people who find themselves at the most vulnerable, uh, and thus most like sort of like prone to violence positions in a capitalist system, right? Like the people who are doing like day laborers and domestic workers and custodians, and you know, my thesis play is about high school ninth graders who are in a Title I school in Texas, who I think are also like equally sort of seen as disposable resources, right? Like, and you see it in the missions of most schools who talk about preparing their students for the 21st century labor force, right? Like that it's all part of this mill of like the factory that is the US. So I think for me, it's an obsession and a fascination and an insistence on methods of survival. How do people cobble methods for survival? And that survival is not like, oh, I have food. Like I have food on the table and a roof over my head, because one, those things are, you know, never promised, even if you're constantly laboring in this country. But two, I think for me, survival really feels much more grounded in how do people who are part of an extractive system remind themselves and insist on their humanity every single day. So I think for me, there's like an urgency for the characters and the situations and the things I look at and obsess with to feel fun and funny and also like brutal and to then shift swiftly into those modes as much and as often as possible, to never let you were talking earlier about the question of the audience, and people want to see the production on, people want to see their money's worth. That's wild, because they do. Like there's times where like I'll hear someone complain after we'll just watched a show somewhere, right? And I'm like, the actor, like that actor just did a whole bunch of work. The money you're seeing is barely covering what has been asked of that particular person's body. So it's always so wild to me to hear like hunger and demand there. A thing that I think a lot about, and I think I've been increasingly thinking about as someone who has a solo practice and who in their solo practice talks about painful things, painful personal things. A thing I think a lot about is, in what ways am I also participating in some kind of complicitness, right? Like when I tour colleges and universities quite a bit. I get invited to come and do like diversity week, or like you're being brought by the Department of like Latina Studies. And I think a lot about the fact that like the show I'm usually being brought out for is Undocuments, which is the first full-length solo piece that I ever wrote and performed. I continue to perform it. I continue to love the piece. I really like have such a deep love for the person who wrote it, right? For that version of myself, and also for like the young version of myself that lived that moment in time. And yeah, what does it mean to say like, great, I will talk about my brother's deportation and what happened to my family as a result, and certain sort of wounds. Let me look at the contract and I'll see how much. Okay, great. And let's make sure the travel's included. And it feels bizarre. And I have to eat, and some of that money will be sent back home. And for me, one of the wonderful things about audience expectation is that I have become really delighted by the fact that this is a show that I can pack in a small suitcase, which is at my feet right now. And I have a version of the show that lives inside of a flash drive on a PowerPoint, because a lot of universities don't have QLab, or the places where I'll present don't have QLab. So it's just, here's a PowerPoint and you can just run the slides. There's a delight for me in having a show like that, because it makes theater possible in places and communities that I think are often most susceptible to, again, extraction. So small example, and then I'll sort of wrap up the response. But I got to do Undocuments last August in Carbondale, Illinois. And yeah, I was brought to SIU at Carbondale, Illinois. And Carbondale, Illinois, you don't really think like, oh, this show about sure. And I learned that one of the reasons that I was invited is because Carbondale, Illinois has a really significant population of largely Mexican laborers who have moved to Carbondale because of the peach and apple orchards nearby. So generations of this work. As a result, there is a tremendous amount of DACA recipients, undocumented students, and second generation, or rather first generation Mexican American students who are on campus at SIU who don't otherwise see themselves, right? And whatever representation is a fraud project, da 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 da. But bringing the show there and having such a clear connection to these students and all of us being there because of a system of labor that forced their parents into having to make the decision to live in Carbondale, Illinois, makes the work feel like there's something potent in it. There's something that combats isolation or loneliness, which I think is the thing that the state most desires us to feel. So for me, I think there's certainly something that feels valuable and combative against like state-sanctioned loneliness in doing and presenting stories that are about people who are most susceptible to the violence of extractive systems.
Very good. Awesome. You win the prize. No, what I will say about that, oh my God. No, I know. I was thinking my question was very big. I guess tied to that, I guess it makes me think about here you are sort of navigating. I hate these terms, but I'll use them just for a second, because venues that are more conventional, subscriber based, have a capital campaign that they run, are perhaps well funded or semi well funded. Okay, there's those venues that are definitely part of capital and capital's machinery, even when they have initiatives against that inside of the system. But then you also navigate, going to Carbondale or, doing stuff at a community center, or, you know what I mean? Like, so that doesn't have a subscriber base, that isn't, is not thinking about like, what's my capital campaign, so I guess there's just different questions. And I think that as an artist, that can be wonderful and bountiful, but I also wonder if it causes any stress on your part, if it causes any renegotiation in your mind about like, how do you walk into those different spaces?
Yeah. I think I had I think there's like a weird, I'll name it as this. I think there's like a strange level of like class anxiety that I think like pops up. And I can remember the first time I had to fill out FAFSA. And the first time that I had to fill out FAFSA, I like looked at my parents' taxes, and it was like, oh, combined, they're making somewhere around like, I think at the time it was like 11,000 and some change. This is combined. This is in El Paso, Texas. And I like looked at that number and I was like, I don't think that's a lot. Okay, for a year. I don't think that's a lot for a combined income. And I filled it out and whatever, sent it off. And years later, I get a contract, flash forward to like last year, and I have a contract from like DePaul. And the department is offering like $6,000 to come and do documents for a night, right? And when those kinds of contracts pop up in my inbox, I have this moment of being like, oh yeah, I'll sign the PDF, and also I have a moment of like, that's wild. Like, oh, that is like a wild sort of like economic leap that just happened in your particular life, that this labor that has cost your parents so much of their body can be broken down to a number that can be then put on a form, and like later in your life, you will perform a particular kind of labor that will not be as strenuous on your body as theirs is on theirs. and it will also come down to like a number on a box in a contract that you will then file at the end of the year for your taxes. So I think like first there is that level of like class anxiety, and then there is the kind of class anxiety that is given to us by the form, by theater. I had a really just like lovely collaborator. Quite to this day, I still like. I'm never letting go of this homie ever. But one time they did ask. They were like, "Hey, when are you gonna stop doing college shows like that? That seems like, when are you gonna do like, like real theaters?" And I was like, "Oh," because I could sense, right, like, when are you gonna do real theaters creates a very specific reality for what is considered theater and what is considered performance and what isn't. And if it isn't considered those things, then what is it? And I had like a small moment in the months that followed where I felt like anytime I took a job at a university, like a visiting gig, I had this sort of strange feeling of being like, well, if this isn't theater and performance, it's what? It's a sideshow. It's and so you just sort of like mire yourself in these things that predate you, right? Like I then had a moment to like stop and think and be like, oh, like what is the history of solo performance in the US and how has it been taken up as a kind of like weird curios or like an outsider art or like an unprofitable move for a theater, or in our current climate, right? Like a fun cash cow if the person who we're bringing is like well known, and then ultimately, right, then appreciated for the fact that like, oh, this takes a tremendous amount of work, and there's a tremendous amount of skill here that is required to do solo work. So I think like, yeah, I think I've been navigating that particular difference between the like, what some would call like non-traditional invitations to performance at like colleges, at community centers, at cafetoriums. I've been thinking a lot about for me how important performance theater is. Like I love this thing. I love this thing tremendously. And I always have, and I keep thinking about those moments when I find out that I am somebody's first exposure to performance or theater, and it happened to be because like I was invited to do a show at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin. That feels really wild to be able to take theater in a suitcase and then be that for somebody, and it feels special, and selfishly it's a thing I want to keep hanging on to. And I'm also so grateful for the opportunities that I've received in, like capital T theaters with who will send you the email and be like, we love our da 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 da. Please help by sending your money. I'm very grateful for those invitations and those spaces, and certainly like, they're part of the reason that I know what theater is, in that sort of in that realm. But yeah, I think again, wow, I'm realizing the sort of like the thread through all of this really is just like class capitalism, and the architecture of this thing. But yeah, I'm trying as much as I can to swiftly hold what this form has been told it should be, and what are ways to sneak it out of the proscenium and into places where it has also always existed, which is everywhere. So yeah, I think I'm still trying to figure out like how to cleanly do that. And that's why I have such like a deep love for people like Christina Wong, who I think really just does that well. And like, it's sort of like, yeah, I'll come and do your theater, and also like, I'll see you later, I'm gonna go do a week at ASU, or I'm going to go hang out. Right now, I think she's with Navajo community, working out there currently. So she's incredible.
Yeah, so many ways of doing what we do, and I think that obviously it comes down to communication and the sharing of event, the sharing of story, the staging of event. What does an event mean? What does an encounter mean between an audience and a performer, between an audience and a text? If it is text-based, what is the shape of that text and how does it move through an audience? How does it stay with them? Thinking a lot about hang time with theater, like the after performance of performance, which is sometimes not talked about that much, or where there's so much writing about what did you see and what it was and like how it was designed and what are the choices made, but very little that I've come across, at least yet, around maybe in the realm of relational aesthetics, but looking at, let's study the audience. Let's like actually think about like what are they thinking? What happens? I just took part in a project by a wonderful company whom I may have mentioned here on this series before. Their name is Coney, Coney, and they position themselves as a remote social and physical game design, play design company. They don't really call themselves theater, but they sort of operate under a theater rubric when they apply for grants. And we just did a project recently where I was a participant. And one of the things I loved about that project was great care was taken around this after performance. So we were in the show, we were participating, we were in our breakout rooms, all these things sort of happen. Then there was like a kind of chat afterwards, and so there was that. And then there was this option, and not everybody had to be a part of it, but there was this option made for, if you want to stay connected to the show, for a week we will send you prompts, like kind of things to think about, maybe tasks for your daily spiritual life, like just things. And then at the end, it's that homework, but you can report back 3 things from your week of just having the show in your mind, And I was like, I love this, and it's not a survey. You know what I mean? Because like literally everything that happens now is followed by a survey, like a rated number 5, rated number 10, rated, and I'm just like, I just want to live with the thing. Like I just want to have it in my brain, or maybe it's escaped my brain. Maybe it didn't have an impact or whatever. But so there's, again, because that goes to the transactional nature. I feel like surveys are transactional. They're asking you to do the rating system, the hierarchy, consumerist to sort of approach that. Tell us the 5 things you loved, like kind of thing. But this was sort of a different thing. It was like, yeah, how are you thinking about it? How is it manifesting in your daily life? Like, what does it make you connect to? And let us know. Like, just let us know. Like, with no we'll follow up and grade you or like whatever. It was just like, let us know. We're so curious. And I was like, I love this. So I'm just thinking a lot about hang time theater in relationship to the making of theater and the why of theater. And yeah, so I don't know if you have thoughts around that at all, but I just wanted to like put that in the air.
Yeah, this is a question that I like love, and actually, like for me, actually, is the thing I actually think I like most about theater. Like it's the reason that I love the feeling after. Like I love the feeling when the show ends. Because I get to turn to next to the person that I sat with and go like, or like, oh, or whatever. And I love that you said live. I just want to live with the thing, because that is what it most feels like, which is like I've just been given this like small motor of thought that I can't carry. It's just like in me. And I get to just have it for the train ride home, for the car home, for the walk back, for the next day, for randomly in the shower, for my next meal. And I love and that's like, that feeling is the reason theater happens, right? Like, I actually think that's the thing, I hope anyway, that's the thing we crave most, is just to have feeling invoked and then sit with it and deal with it and be in it. Stacey Karen Robinson, who I like love dearly, and who has just been like so instructive in helping me think about like practice, like what is your practice, often talks about the theater event as the sort of appetizer and the conversation after as the meal, which I think is kind of a lovely like dynamic to think about. Oh, the thing you're actually eating happens when you're with someone processing or disclosing or discovering, and like what you just saw, like what you've seen, is the thing that was given to you to make you think. It's the stimulant. The stimulus happens after. I really love that, and I treasure that deeply, and that, I think, to go back to that earlier conversation about like about why I'm kind of really like obsessed with readings right now, and like table work and rehearsal rooms, is I love listening to actors talk and process. I love sitting with a team of people after that first read through and just what stuck out, what did we think, what's going on, what questions do you have. That's beautiful to me, because what I find so often happens is that like actors just offer things like from their lives, from their days, from friends, and you're like, oh, like we're all being alive together in a room right now, and it's all being funneled through this particular piece of text that we all just got through, but like mostly we just got to be less lonely together. And that feels really good. So I think I also am similarly really just like hungry for that kind of thing. And I love that you said like and I love like what Coney does and what they're sort of proposing, what the project is, and that it is in a survey, because I that's such a weird, and I get why that exists and da 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 da, but like it's just such a weird practice to be like, how did you hear about us? On a scale of 1 to 5, what did you think? Yeah, like like the paper survey, or the sort of like, or the like the Google form at the end of the thing is always just such a cursed object. I'm just like, people don't want to do this, so like the responses you get aren't even going to be great because people don't want to do this.
Yeah, and it's literally after every single transaction. Like literally, I shop something at the market, I get a survey right after. I go to the pharmacy, I get a survey right after it. I go to the arts venue. Immediately, literally, like a second after it's done, the survey's in my inbox, and I'm just like, huh, what? Stop! It's just too much, and it's also, yeah. And I agree. I don't think that people really have time to fill it out, or going to be, their responses are going to be useful, to be honest. Like it's just going to be like, okay, I'm just trying to get through it, or click, I delete, and then I'm never going to respond to that
And
survey
then
ever
never gonna
again.
respond. Yep.
So I find it very alienating, actually, even though it's probably meant, with good intentions, but as Mac Weldon says, beware of good intentions in the theater, as you know. The other thing I want, as we're coming up at our hour here, how did you get into theater? Like what sort of was the bug? Like what was it that you like, I saw that thing and I want to make a thing?
I love the bug. I just got to catch invasive species at the tank, and the show literally begins with like the acting bug coming on stage and biting the protagonist during childhood. So I love like the bug thing is really like, oh. I think like I know the very first thing I watched on stage that was a play was like a Peter Pan that happened in Juarez when I was maybe like 5 or 6. But I don't think I clocked that as like, this is theater. I was like, this is Peter Pan, and Peter Pan is a movie. I love this. I think really the thing that really did it for me actually was competing in speech and debate competitions in high school. I did speech and debate competitions in high school, and most leagues have debaters, but they also have oral interpretation. And so for folks that don't know, oral interpretation is where the student takes a piece of literature. So there's different categories. So there's like dramatic interpretation or humorous interpretation, where you take a play or an excerpt of a piece of text and you cut it down to 10 minutes, a maximum of 10 minutes, and you perform it in front of a judge, and then they rank you 1 through 6, however many people there are there. And the goal is to sort of like, again, get to like the final, eventually get enough points to get to state or compete at regionals or get to the national tournament, whatever. And I got conned into competing because I wanted to do costumes for my theater department. And the woman who ran the department, Sean Mena, who is one of my favorite humans in the world, and is the reason, and is really, I think, the singular reason that I insisted on keeping performance in an orbit. She looked at me and handed me a script and said, "Have you ever been on stage?" And I said, "No." And she goes, "Great, memorize this." And it was a 10-minute scene because Tony Camacho, who was a student at my school, was like our top competitor on the team, and she needed a partner. So like they just needed a body to like stand there and like do the other part of the scene so that Tony could like, be Tony. Incredible actor. And I wasn't super competitive. I did well because I also have like good kid syndrome. And so I was like, well, I'm going to do this. I got to be at least good at it. Okay, I'll just try. I'll keep trying. But I wasn't hungry to win. What I was hungry for was watching. I loved watching other students perform. I was like obsessed. I would go back and watch like the national finals tapes and be like, that was amazing. That was an incredible choice. And what that did is at any given competition, you have anywhere between 25 to, sometimes 65, sometimes 172 entries per event, which means that in any given round, you're being exposed to at least 6 to 7 new pieces of literature. So I would go back and like look up all of these plays that these kids were excerpting, because I was like, oh, like that's how I learned who Maria Callas was because a high school student was doing a cut of Terrence McNally's master class. My first encounter with Margaret Edson's Wit was because the Texas state champion performed a 10-minute rendition of Wit. The first time I ever heard of Agnes of God was two high school students performing Agnes of God. Later on, when I started judging, somebody was doing Sylvia, or like the goat, or Who is Sylvia? Edward Albee. Yeah, they were doing that like in high school. So I was reading all of these plays and I was just like, this is an amazing form. Like this is doing something that like I didn't know could be done. Watching students try and embody was so weird and cool. And then I eventually found Extreme Exposure, and that text, I think, really broke things open for me. Reading the work of Dale Orlander Smith in that text, reading the work of Luis Alfaro in that text, that entire tome is just like so marked in here as like the thing that I knew I wanted to do. When I read that book, I was like, I think this is how my brain works. I think this particular scoring of language, these line breaks, these blocks of text, this insistence on metaphor, this sort of like merger of like the hyper present body with the sort of like with the lyric attached to it and haunting it, feels like the way my brain wants to work. I love this. So I think that's really the genesis of it. And then I put it away and I was like, who cares? And then I returned to theater when I turned 27. As an actor first, just because I wanted to go back to a thing I loved. And eventually as a writer, because I was like, oh no, I love this, and not like this is fun. Like this makes me feel like I make sense.
Yeah, I hear you completely. And thanks for relaying that story. And speech and debate, I'd sort of forgotten about all of that. And
Mhm.
I participated in like speech tournaments and
Really?
yeah, I did. And yeah, in high school. And so but it was I forget which category it is, but it's where you write your own speech and deliver
Mhm.
it. Yeah. So I did a couple of those and I really liked it. But yeah, but I sort of, it brought back like, oh my God, of course, all those,
Yeah.
and seeing how different people,
Mhm.
present their work and like, and all that stuff. So yeah, super fun, but yeah, I love that. I love that form. It's not often, it doesn't often come up actually, when people think about theater or even talk about it. So that's sort of lovely to hear. As we round out our hour, I wanted to ask you if you wanted to plug anything, if you wanted us to read anything of yours, where could we find it, all that good stuff. Where can we find some Valles, stuff?
Yeah. I yeah, I don't think I am like I don't think I have anything that I'm like, "Oh, go read this of mine." I will say this, I guess, if people are interested in reading more of my work, I'm happy to, yeah, just reach out to me on Instagram. My handle is the Jesucia, TheJesucia, the Jesucia on Instagram, and DM me and I'll send you whatever play you want to read. I'm on New Play Exchange, so if you have a play that you're like, oh, I want to read this one, go. I'll send you the PDF. Um, um, but yeah, I think like more than anything, I'd love to just like uh yeah, plug some authors that I'm like, oh, everyone should be reading this.
Yeah, let
There
us know. Who should we be reading? Let's make our list.
Jennifer Tamayo, I think, is somebody who's doing really, really incredible writing, in poetry largely, but also is a performance worker. Um, Alan Pelaz Lopez, who is a poet and writes really, really very fully, I think, in really brilliant ways about migrations. Ariana Brown, who is like a writing mentor and I think does also incredible work in poetry. Um, and yeah, those feel like three authors that I'm most like, oh, everyone, like, let's all read this. Let's all read this.
Cool, awesome.
Yeah,
I love it. Thank you so much. Thanks for making
thank
time with
you.
us. For those of you out there who don't know us, this is Conversations from the Alcove. Check us out. Check out the whole series. Take notes. Read the authors that people are recommending. Follow the authors that are on the series and see what they're up to. As I say goodbye on this end, I'll hit the end of recording, but I'll stay online to do some follow-up stuff with Jesus. But for now, thanks y'all and see you soon.
Take care.